Unhoused or homeless, which one am I? Is it one or the other? Can both words apply? I lived in a house, but never a home. And there is a difference when no love is shown. Being unhoused is factual, unloved, unnatural, homeless problems, irrational, and things come undone. It's not the words which you use, it's not the structure you choose, it's the family you lose when unhoused and on the run. So now I have left that place where I stayed. There were no answers to pleas I had made. Now I'm unhoused and homeless, face a life of despair. And many like me crying life just ain't fair. So parents, kids need a home where they're loved and not alone. Try to set a new tone and let it ring loud. Please don't hesitate, act sooner than late. Tell them how well they rate and make you so proud. So why do some struggle over which word is right? Both conditions are wrong when they make you uptight. Find the answers you seek through those you can trust. Seek the road you should follow and do what you must. Find the answers you seek through those you can trust. Find the road you must follow and do what is just.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Sticka. I'm the program director for today's session on homelessness, which I have entitled Unhoused or Homeless, Walls, Barriers, and Better Mental Health. We're going to be talking about problems as they exist in Lane County, possible solutions, and just generally review what seems to be in the news across the country. So up front, by way of introduction of myself, I am Ron Sticka, and I'm the program director and executive director for the Kim Sticka PTSD Music and Arts Foundation, which is the overall sponsor of this event, which is also made possible by some of our local community businesses and supporters, Banner Bank, Tyree Oil Company, Journey Tree, Financial Advisors and Investments, and the Hutchinson Cox Law Firm. So we thank them for their support for making this possible. I want to take just a moment to recognize Senator James Manning, who is also going to be a participant with today's session, but unfortunately his wife passed away a few days ago, and he would be attending a funeral in St. Louis. James has a link. I don't know if you're with us, James, or will be joining us, but our hearts go out to you and our condolences to your family. So just in brief, today we're going to be covering and discussing causes of homelessness and maybe possible solutions. So within Lane County, what is the scope of what we find? Today, we're going to be reviewing this in 3 sections. The first section will deal with homelessness in general, the second session with youth homelessness, and the third with homelessness experienced by veterans in our community. I am a veteran myself. It's an area of concern to me, but in particular, I see youth and their issues with homelessness as one of the major issues we need to confront. So I did write a song. Hopefully all of you have had an opportunity to hear the one. It's under the title Unhoused or Homeless. It's sung by a female voice, but it's really intended to be inclusive of all genders. And refers to basic human needs. Some people have concerns about what we call the people who are unhoused. Are they unhoused or homeless? And the song sort of resolves that being unhoused is really a statement of facts, that you don't have a roof over your head, things that can be observed. But the deeper issues are those within, which stem from our emotional being and our backgrounds and how we were raised and things of that nature. So this highlights the underlying problems associated with mental health and the nurturing that we need for the minds as well as the bodies. So in the lyrics, the girl talks about living in a house, but never a home. We'll talk about that as maybe being one of the issues for lack of direction and parenting skills being needed. So what I note as causes of homelessness probably include the following, and maybe we'll be discussing even more than these. But these 6 basic causes I see are poverty, lack of training for family and work responsibilities, lack of job opportunities, substance abuse and addiction issues, diagnosed psychiatric and behavioral problems, and those who have been victimized by abuse and other conditions which have put them on the streets. So how do we reverse such trends? Well, I suggest we need ways to assist people with housing. It's no secret that the costs of housing are going through the roof, particularly in our area and other areas in Oregon. The needs for mentorship and peer counseling, educational opportunities may provide solutions, things and attention which prevent abuse and addictive behaviors, on-job training opportunities, and professional intervention. Those are perhaps key areas we can utilize to try to help make things better. So at this time, I'd like to bring in our first panel to discuss these issues from their perspective. First is Brittany Quick-Warner, who is the current president and director of the Eugene Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Brittany. Kris McAlister, I don't know if we have on yet. So he is chair of the Lane County Homelessness and Poverty Board, and Beth Sheehan, Eugene Mission. So this will consist of our first panel. And Brittany, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Ron. Kris is on.
Okay, great.
I think Janice can probably see him. There he is.
Hi, Kris. Okay, Brittany first, and then Kris, and then we'll go to Beth. So tell us what you can about homelessness and how we can try to get a handle on the problem.
Thanks, Ron. Good morning, everyone. Like Ron said, my name is Brittany Quick-Warner. I'm the president and CEO at the Eugene Chamber of Commerce. I'm honored to be here and really appreciate the invite. I'm happy to kick off this morning. And what I'm going to do, hopefully, is just kind of help some folks understand the lay of the land when it comes to the homeless crisis that we have facing our community right now. I have some high-level statistics of the crisis that we're in that I can help us get all grounded in, and then I'm gonna toss it over to the experts, which are the folks who are gonna be following me in this conversation. A lot of people might be wondering why the Chamber of Commerce CEO is speaking at a conference about homelessness. And if I would have been asked this about 4 months ago, I probably would have had the same question myself. But for the last probably 3.5 months, our chamber has been doing an incredible amount of research and understanding of this issue in a really deep way. And I'm excited to be here to kind of share what we've learned and some of the observations that we've made, and some recommendations that we've been able to glean and we're happy to put forward. A lot of you, if you're living in our community, have probably seen or witnessed the crisis that we're referring to of homelessness. And some of you may have actually seen what feels like an increase in the level of number of people who are homeless and the severity of this issue over the last year. While there has been a slight increase in the number of individuals who are homeless, at least our official counts, the reality is what we're dealing with right now is over the last year, because of COVID regulations, a lot of our shelters that do provide safe places for people to sleep had to reduce the capacity that they were able to provide to the community. And so what you see is a lot of individuals who might have had a safe place to go prior to COVID, who now are living out on the streets in places that are not habitable for human beings. And what we've realized is that this issue has become a lot more present and a lot more visual to people. And so there's a lot more people kind of looking around saying, what is going on with this issue here? And how are we as a community dealing with it? Our chamber, we have a vision for this community that I think is shared by probably many of you on this call and many of the folks who are speaking this morning. And that's a thriving local community where businesses can succeed and individuals can live happy, healthy lives. Ultimately, that's what we're striving for as an organization. That is what our chamber focuses on every single day. We believe that a strong, healthy business community is the way to make sure folks can have good paying jobs and stability in their lives. But we work on community issues far and wide that with really the interest in mind of making our community the best it can be. When it comes to this issue specifically, our vision is for a community where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And again, that's a shared vision that we have with a lot of the organizations who are working in this space. For us, the issue really kind of boiled down to two things that we're trying to sort of simplify for our members and for the community to help us really try and find paths forward. The first is that we do have a growing number of individuals living on the street. 80% of the folks who are unhoused in our community are living in places that are inhabitable for human beings. So that means they're not in a shelter, they're not in temporary housing. They're living on the streets, in parks, in parking lots, in cars, parked in spots where that's not where I think as a community should be aspiring for anyone to be living. The second issue that we're really keened in on is the growing crime that has been associated with some of these unsanctioned camps and with just other criminal activity in the community. I want to be very clear that we do not believe that all homeless individuals are criminals. And we also do not believe that the act of being homeless should be a crime and that we should be criminalizing the act of being homeless. That is absolutely not the place where we're coming from. We do, however, believe that there are some serious crimes happening in this community that we have got to, as a community, not tolerate, and we need to hold folks accountable. But we also recognize that just the sheer fact of being on the streets and being homeless puts folks in a situation where they are vulnerable to crime that other individuals are doing as well. So we really believe that addressing this issue of crime is not only for our businesses, but it's for our homeless population too, because they're victims of this a lot of times as well. As far as why did we dive into this issue as a chamber? Over the last 3 or 4 months, the number of businesses who've been reaching out to us and just saying, we don't really know what to do anymore. This issue has gotten to the point where we cannot, as a business, maintain our operations because of the issues that we're seeing, whether it's crime, whether it's intimidation, businesses who are spending a lot of money to have to deal with the theft and the burglary and the vandalism, the assault. They have employees that are quitting their jobs because they don't feel safe going to their places of work. And so this became an issue that was relevant to the business community in a much bigger way. And as such, we knew that we wanted to dive into it and see if there was anything that we could do to bring the private sector to the conversation. A lot of the conversations that we were having with people, they felt hopeless. People in this community feel hopeless right now because they either think that nothing is being done, they don't know what is being done, or they think whatever is being done isn't working. And so one of the things that that we're prioritizing and we'll talk about is just getting the word out about the good things that are happening in this community. And you're going to hear a lot about that from the nonprofits here today because they're the best ones we have doing this work. We also as a chamber believe that we could just come out and say something's got to be done about this. But if we don't have a specific ask and we don't have recommendations to come along with it, I don't think it's worth much for us to just be another loud voice saying, hey, city or county, you guys need to do something. So as such, we kind of dove in deep and we thought about what role can the chamber play in this conversation. And we kind of have five areas that we're really focused on. The first is research. To me, if I was going to step into this conversation, very new and kind of from the sidelines, the last thing I wanted to do was to walk in and not have done my homework. I want to be able to hang in these conversations and understand what people are saying, know what we've tried in the past, know what we could be trying in the future if we just reorient ourselves a little differently. So we've been doing a lot of research. The second is to organize and convene businesses around this issue. That's what we do as an organization. And I truly believe that this issue is bigger than our government. It's bigger than our nonprofit community. And it is going to take every single one of us putting our heads together and committing to finding solutions and helping the individuals who are vulnerable on the streets if we're actually going to get to a place where we're solving this issue and not just managing it. The third is communicating and educating. Like I said, I think there's a level of hopelessness out in the community just because people don't understand what's going on. And they know this issue is complex, but they don't have a way to understand what's going on. And so our organization is working really hard to figure out how can we simplify an incredibly complex issue and then turn around and get that information out to the public as easily as we can and as accurately as we can. The fourth is to innovate and collaborate. Like I said, I think we all need to be at the table and the business community has got to be there. And the business community can bring a lot more than just dollars. And I think for a lot of nonprofits, when they're trying to figure out how to interface with the public or the private sector, the first thing to think about is like, oh, they can support my effort by donating. There's a lot more resources out there from the private sector besides just money. It's ideas, it's endurance, it's innovation. Like there are people out there who have really great solutions for things like this. They just don't know how to connect. And so what we're trying to do is get that private sector connection made so we can actually start to broaden the number of people who are trying to put their heads together about this. The fifth area is to advocate for solutions. Our organization is an advocacy organization. We've got a lot of experience in that. And like I said, we're not just going to say, hey, someone needs to fix this. We're going to say, hey, we as a community need to fix this. And here's some of the ideas that we have. And here's what we're willing to contribute to do that. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the data that we found and the research that we've done. Over the last 3.5 months, I've had, I think I'm up to about 136 meetings or interviews with individuals about this topic specifically. I've had the privilege of meeting with almost every single executive director of a nonprofit in this community who is working in around this space and had a one-on-one sit down with them to really understand from their perspective, what are the issues that we're facing? What are the root causes? What are the challenges keeping us from actually solving this issue? We've met with city and county staff. We've met with neighborhoods. We've met with businesses. And we've also met with folks from other communities outside of ours, LA, the East Coast. There are other communities all across this country who are dealing with this crisis. And we want to learn from those who have had success in solving that. To be honest, Eugene, in a lot of ways, is a community that other people look to for successful models. And I think we should be proud of that. But I also know that there's other communities out there doing good things that we should glean information from. So in that research, we learned a lot of things, but kind of the state of this issue that I think is important for folks to understand. So a handful of years ago, our community made the decision to start kind of counting the number of homeless individuals we have in our community a little differently. Historically, based on kind of federal requirements, we have used what's called a point in time count. And that count has typically been done one day a year. A lot of times it was been done in the winter, and they got as many volunteers as possible to go out in the evening and count the number of homeless individuals that they could find on the streets. As you can imagine, there's a lot of shortcomings with that way of really quantifying our homeless crisis. One, in the middle of winter, there's a lot of people who are hiding in places that they are desperately trying to find warmth. And so we're not finding everyone who's out on the streets. And it's only one night a year. And so for a really long time, we were severely undercounting the number of individuals that we had in our community that were homeless. A couple of years ago, our community adopted a new method called the homeless by name count. And this count is collected by organizations across the community who are serving our homeless population, who are putting their data and information into our homeless management system that we use as a county. And we, in theory, are able to create a list of individuals by name who are homeless in our community, who have accessed a service from or through a service provider, or have somehow been identified through this homeless management system as being homeless. So in 2020, throughout the entire year, there were 9,107 individuals in Lane County who were actively homeless. So as you can imagine, folks kind of, it ebbs and flows. People kind of come into and out of the system throughout the year. Some people do find housing. Others kind of fall off because they don't access services anymore. And if they're out of the system for a couple months, they're no longer counted. If they come back in, they are. So just last month in May, in the Lane County area, we had 3,245 individuals who were actively homeless in our county. That's an enormous number of people that we as a community, I think, have an obligation and should feel obligated to serve. 2,400 of those individuals were in the city of Eugene. Now, we have a lot of service providers in the city of Eugene, and so as such, a lot of those numbers come through those service providers. And we're also the largest city in the county, and so it makes sense for us to have sort of the largest population of homeless individuals. And a lot of times we get caught in this I think, sort of unhelpful conversation about, well, people are just coming here from other places. And to me, I think yes, and maybe we should count that, and we should maybe figure out why that's happening. But it doesn't really solve the problem. And so I think that we have to be careful not to get distracted chasing down things like that aren't actually solving the problem. And that's that we have 3,245 people actively homeless in our community. As a county, we have about 1,500 beds available across the spectrum of options. So emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and rapid reentry. And this was in 2020. Prior to COVID, we had about 636 emergency shelter beds. Now we're down closer to 400 because of that reduction in numbers that had to happen. This doesn't include the temporary sites that were kind of quasi-sanctioned at Washington Jefferson Park and the 13th and Chambers. Those were sites that the city said, okay, this is not going to be a setup kind of managed camp with a lot of wraparound services, but it's going to be a place where folks can shelter. They won't be moved around. They won't be forced to leave unless there's a serious kind of criminal issue that they're having. But the idea is that those individuals will eventually be moved out of those places because they're not intended for sheltering purposes. And so what we as a community need to do is find places, safe places for those individuals to be. Currently, we have about 75 people at that 14th and Chambers site and about 230 in the Washington Jefferson Park. Like I said, about 80% of the folks in Eugene who are unhoused live in places that are not meant for human habitation. And as a community, I think we have an obligation to find more places for people to be. And that's where the chamber is really trying to step into the conversation. we have been actively involved in with the city and county in finding additional safe sleep sites for tents and car campers. The county, or the city, excuse me, about a month and a half ago, agreed to sort of increase the number of folks that they would allow to kind of congregate in these different sites across the community temporarily. And so we've been working with private sector property owners, businesses, to try and identify pieces of land that we can lease as a community to set up these safe and sanctioned sites for individuals. Now, there's all kinds of shortcomings with this, I think, strategy for doing this. And one of which is individuals with mental health or addiction issues aren't necessarily the best fit for a larger congregate site. And I think that some of the other service providers can talk a little bit more about just the logistical kind of reasons why that isn't the best option for them. So for us, we think it's important to have a broad spectrum of types of sheltering options for people, and that we can't just put all of our eggs in one basket. We really need to try and diversify the options that we have. And I think there's a lot of root causes and barriers that we're facing. We have a housing crisis in this community. And so for unhoused and housed individuals, the affordability of housing in our community is at a crisis level. And so, you know, we can wrap around services for these folks all day long, but if we don't actually build more housing that is affordable for people, we're never going to get out of this place that we're in. To be clear, I don't think we can build our way out of this problem, but we do still need a significant amount of housing. There's all
Brittany, you do work with Kris McAlister, right? With the Lane County Homelessness and Poverty Board?
Do I?
You are involved with Kris McAlister, right? With the Lane County?
Yeah, so I just recently was appointed over the last year to the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and we've been working together, and I'm a big fan of Kris and the work that he's doing. I will wrap up my comments by saying that just kind of reiterating that we as a community cannot just rely on our nonprofits, and you're going to hear from the nonprofits that are doing a lot of this work, but it's bigger than what they can handle on their own. And we all have to be rolling up our sleeves and really trying to figure out what is our role in helping to solve this issue. How are we contributing, and how are we thinking outside the box? Because at this point, you know, we've got to start addressing some of these issues differently. And I believe, like I said, that the folks you're going to hear from today are some of the most equipped to do so. So I appreciate being here. Hopefully that was able to sort of give a basis of the crisis level that we're at, and we can learn a little bit more from the folks here today.
It does, Brittany, and stand by. I might have a question for you. And for the audience, use your chat function. If there are questions you have, you can pose those there. We'll try to get to it if we have sufficient time and get at least a couple of them answered. Let's transition to Kris McAlister, Chair, Lane County Homelessness and Poverty Board, just recently taking over from Pat Walsh, who I know, he's a friend of mine. So Kris, welcome, and do you agree with what Brittany says? And take it from there.
I agree with a lot of what Ms. Brittany says. There are some nuances that I think we want to explore a little bit more. And that said, a lot of the unsheltered numbers are where those numbers are coming from. There are portions of our adult community that don't count under the HUD requirements and whatnot. So when families double up, when multiple individuals live in the same dwelling, if you're a child, you count. If you're an adult, you don't. So there are those little nuances. There's a lot of other in our community. When you are unhoused or homeless, you are the other. And whether it is the mentally ill, the criminal, or as some people use in a pejorative way, the homeless. And so our people are unhoused in a means of it's a conditional term, unhoused, as mentioned in your opening statement. Whereas homeless, those are the people who have lost hope. There is no place for them. There's no place for them to be. There's no place for them where they feel wanted, included, or able to heal. And so a lot of my experiences came from direct experience. I lived on the streets of Springfield, Eugene from 13 to about 22. Programs that used to exist in this community that helped me get off the street don't exist anymore. And so there's different ways that we have as a community tried to engage in this problem, in this situation, and these personal journeys and struggles for our people. And not every not every option or everything offered works for everybody, and not everything that people need is present. And so I would just like to explore a couple things in regards to how does homelessness help and get helped when there's things such as trauma, mental illness, and drug use among many of the options offered. And so we have bastions in our community, such as the Eugene Mission and the programs that St. Vinny's has ran that have been pretty much the main building blocks that our community has focused on. And that for the greater community has worked. There's drug treatment programs, there's support treatment, there is even vocational supports. But if you don't fit into that program, if you're not fitting into congregate shelter, it may not work for you. Parts of it may be exactly what you need, but the other component that's tacked on or requirement for you to participate, that could be the door that closes. And once we lose people due to closed doors, we may not ever get them back. I on average bury 1 to 2 of my people a year. And we work with the people who are the hardest to help, the ones who've fallen out of the systems, who've been banned here because of behavior, or have been rejected here because of a failed UA, as they're trying to struggle through what they're going through. They may be on a waiting list and it's the 3rd year and more housing was built, but you didn't qualify because you weren't that type of homeless. And so there's trauma built even within the systems that are supposed to repair it. When you go and you're told, go to your doctor's appointments, and you go and your doctor won't see you because you're 5 minutes late, or because you had the wrong copy of your card because it was the old card that you left back at camp. And now you are, again, the fault for why you don't get help. And that's a lot of weight to carry and a lot of weight to hold. Some people are trying to get back to their families, to get back to where they once were or where they want to be. And there's not a whole lot of supports in the system when you're being told, go on, get lost, leave. And so this trauma is reinforced on the daily basis. Whether you're walking down to the...
If I can step in, do we need more help with people who can steer those who are in need of assistance, to find jobs and things? Do we have enough volunteer support in the community to handle the situation?
That's a great question, sir. And we don't have enough of everything. In a sense that we can have volunteers, but if the opportunities don't hold for them, for example, we can navigate people to housing lists, but if there's no housing, they just are on a list. We can navigate people to a vocational program, but if there's only 16 spots and there's 45 people, someone's got to go. And so we need to have more navigators, as we call them. We need to have more people in the community on the other side who are helping court providers, employers, businesses to help be part of the solutions. We need more places for people to be. You can tell someone housing first, but if they don't get in there with services that keep them in the housing, then it's housing next and housing last. And if we build up opportunities for permanent support, permanent supportive housing, and then they fall out, then we need more permanent supportive housing because we are using them off of numbers that we're realizing only through successful application. Sorry, my dog is also agreeing with me.
Yeah, dogs need support too.
we have specialized supports. So if you're a veteran, if you're a child, if you are a family, there are tiered and titrated supports for you. But if you are other, if your community didn't get behind that one track, then we're lost. And we talk a lot about drug and crime, but we don't, as a community, tend to support camps or systems that would actually help get in and make lasting change for that. Only programs like Willamette Families Inpatient and Outpatient, the Mission's Life Change Program, if those programs work for you, and I know several people who have been saved by those programs, then they work. If they don't work for you, we have to find that item. We can't throw away people because they didn't fit into the 1 or 2 options we've offered. Sometimes, especially with recovery, with trauma, with mental illness, as a person who has suffered from trauma, as a person who has had to deal with medications while homeless, adjusting to meds while on the street is not only scary, but one of the most dangerous things you can ever go. Imagine being safe in your home when the meds take over and your mind goes a different space, or you aren't feeling things right, you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling closed in, and then put it right there on Washington Jefferson with people yelling, not worth it, expletives, and then calling the police on you when you moved 4 feet in the other direction to avoid the person who was screaming at you because of their own untreated mental illness.
Kris, you've been there, and you mentioned earlier that programs that helped you extricate yourself from that situation no longer exist. What helped you that isn't around right now?
When I was a youth, I went through the Looking Glass program, and they did great work. But as I grew up a little bit older and got into the 20s, there was a program by Catholic Community Services that actually gave me credits and a reserve for when I did self-improvement or community improvement items, such as going to my mental health and counseling appointments, going to college, and doing vocational work. And so when I accrued enough personal development time, I had enough to be able to move out with my first last in deposit. And so I was able to get my first rental through that program. And I have been off the streets for now going on 15 years. And it's never looked back.
So we've got to encourage people to help lift themselves up and then have the mentorship that gets them and keeps them moving in the right direction.
Yes, sir. But it also has to be self-determined. We can't force people into cookie cutters and have them say, you have to live your life my way.
I agree with that. It's got to be those that are wanting to help need to respect the needs of the person who is being helped and make it a partnership so that you're right. So there's no hoop jumping to get to the right place. So,
yes, sir.
And I think we have to treat each person as unique in that process. So, Kris, anything else? Do we need any job training programs or anything like that to help, like on-job training or things that will keep them more active in positive ways?
We need more of everything, sir. The job training is just one component. One thing that I would like to just frame up is we need a change of how we perceive our unhoused and our people. A couple years ago, it was brought up that a lot of the people here are not our people, that they come from elsewhere. And when we looked at the data from the initial homeless by name list, from the initial point in time count, which while flawed was the only component that we had, we found that 60 to 75% of our people were from Lane County or Oregon. These are our displaced loggers. These are our displaced social workers. These are our displaced or replaced technology industry folks. When the corporations came and left, they left several people who had retooled and gone a certain way. I myself retooled for the software and hardware boom that didn't really stick here. And so my skills became obsolete before I even finished college. And so, at least locally. And we have a brain drain. A lot of our people found opportunity elsewhere, which meant other people stayed here and didn't really move. And so when we look at that, we need to retool and look at not those people or those outsiders, but these are our people. This could be your uncle from the mills when they close the next mill. This could be the kids who tried to graduate, but the schooling didn't reach out to them. We have so many different ways where we're losing our people. And then when we lose them for good because they don't have anywhere to go up. They get sicker. The average unhoused man at the age of 50 has health concerns that are equivalent to a 70-year-old man by some studies. So just simply being on the street can change your life drastically.
Hey, Kris, can I make a point here? And I definitely don't want to take away from the point you were making, but I feel like what you were saying, this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about being involved in this conversation, is that for a really long time, our community has sort of pitted the business community against the homeless community. And in my opinion, that's the most, I think, dangerous and hurtful thing that we could be doing to this issue for a lot of reasons. One, I think that there's a lot of shared values that we have and things we want to be doing together. But the other is, if we truly want to move upstream and stop the individuals from entering into homelessness in the first place, we have to, as a community, understand and acknowledge the role that our businesses play in doing that. These businesses, in 1 week, I was talking to businesses that had the number of employees totaled over 500 employees, that these businesses were very seriously considering leaving our community because the level of crisis and the amount of sort of, I don't know, dysfunction that they were experiencing in their ability to run their businesses. And so I think that's, and Kris, I totally know that we're on the same page about this. I just kind of wanted to make that point because I think it's one, as a community, we don't necessarily tie those things together, I think, in a way that's actually helpful. We need to protect the jobs in our community so we don't have more individuals going, being put out on the street because they lost their job. It's just one of those areas that I feel like, as a community, I'm trying to help change the narrative to say, businesses are not the problem. They can help be a part of the solution. We all need to sort of stop sort of putting people against each other in this conversation, which has been done in our community for a long time. So I think Kris and I are definitely on the same page about that. And we spend a lot of time kind of talking about how do we do that as a community, provide opportunities for these homeless individuals in the companies that we have here, so we can help, kind of bring them the foundation that they need to try and start getting out of the situation they're in. So anyways, it's one that I'm very passionate about.
I think we all agree it's got to be a community effort to get everybody to the table and work out things that will improve the situation that exists. And Beth, I'm going to transition right now to you with the Eugene mission and the work that you've done, and it's got a great reputation. It's one of the things we're fortunate to have, but it's not totally adequate to the needs that exist in the community. So why don't you go ahead and give us just a brief history of the Eugene mission, what it does, and things that we might look to as possible ways to improve the homelessness situation in Lane County.
Thank you. I've been with the Eugene mission for 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was on the board of directors for both the mission and for Hosea, the organization that serves homeless and runaway youth. And my head is kind of swimming as I'm listening to the conversation. The things have really radically changed in terms of the service model at the mission in the last year because of COVID. And imagine living in a congregate shelter during a global pandemic that spread through people being together and breathing the same air. So it's been quite a year. So I'll just kind of give you an overall view. The Eugene mission was founded 64 years ago during an era, it was a gospel mission model for essentially bands of traveling men who were looking for a soup kitchen, and it was sort of gospel bed, and that was pretty much it. And you fast forward to 64 years later, and I can't agree with Kris more that homelessness is very nuanced and it's very complicated. I would say that the average conditions that bring a person to the door of the Eugene mission are either a crisis situational homelessness, such as a mother with children who is running from domestic violence and needs a safe place to be until she can be rehoused and connected with legal services, etc., to people who are chronically homeless and really struggling with unsupported mental health issues and intractable addiction. So currently, the service model at the mission, we have what is called a low barrier rescue shelter, and that is essentially a 30-day stay where a guest can come in whatever condition, intoxicated or not, and stay and have an opportunity to explore sobriety, on board into some of the mission's programs, and essentially get off the streets. We are not a mental health facility. We are a facility that's run by volunteers such as myself that are Samaritans that care about people. And so the one area that would keep somebody from coming into the mission in the rescue model is if they're simply too unstable or violent to be in a congregate situation. We do have, large rooms where people stay. There's privacy curtains and the beds are spread out, and we do have to screen for COVID currently. But that's one place where it's really hard to see someone who is so mentally unstable and so self-destructive or potentially violent that we simply can't manage them. And
so what is the response at the Eugene Mission if that's observed, that this is a person that's not going to be safe to themselves and maybe a danger to others when that arrives? Is this a cahoots issue, or?
It's 911 or cahoots. Cahoots is just phenomenal and phenomenally overtaxed. Prior to COVID, we probably, when the doors were just open and people would wander in and out all day, we probably had to call for emergency services at least twice a day because of violence and mental health breakdowns. But we do work closely with cahoots to get people whatever assistance they can. But there is just such a shortage of psychiatric facilities for people who are in that state. So
Is this one of our greatest needs? This is what concerns me. We have, the ability, fortunately, with cahoots for crisis intervention, but a lot of these people need maintenance. So they need to get into a safe environment like Kris is talking about, where they can start to work on their own issues. And how can we make that happen? Or what's the situation we need to improve there?
I think Kris really nailed it when he was talking about trying to regulate on the medications, missing a doctor's appointment, and just the frustration in the navigation of those services using public transportation, particularly during a global pandemic. And then, titrating his medications while he's living outdoors. It's very, very challenging. I don't know what the answer is, but the problem is definitely there, and the Eugene Mission is simply not equipped to handle that degree of mental illness and instability.
What's your population at the present time at the mission?
So the capacity of the mission has 3 unique living centers. We have the Center for Men, the Center for Women, and the Center for Mothers with Children. I'm the director of philanthropy, so naturally I'm constantly fundraising, because what we really need is to be able to take intact families. And again, one of the issues, we work very closely with St. Vincent de Paul with their family annex. We work very closely with Looking Glass and with Hosea, and we're constantly in communication with each other, trying to find places for the clients that we have. But we definitely need a space for dads with kids and for intact families. So in the Women's Center, the capacity of that shelter is 100. And prior to COVID, we were full every night with a waiting list. And currently the number in that shelter is about 30. So we've had a lot of people leave over the last year, and frankly, I don't blame them. Would you really want to live at the Eugene Mission during COVID? So the people who are with us now are people who are working very, very hard to maintain their sobriety. I would say probably 98% of the people who are staying with us have suffered from what seems like intractable addiction, and it's primarily alcoholism and meth. And behind that is childhood trauma, sexual abuse, domestic violence, generational poverty, and some of the things that you were listing at the beginning, Ron, lack of training, lack of role modeling, lack of mentoring, lack of vision, and abuse and addictive behaviors. So
do we need special facilities that can actually do resident type treatment, and how do we get to that point?
We have the Women's Center, we have the Men's Center, which houses adult men, and then we have, and many of them have come through the penal system, and they're working through bench warrants and through legal issues and things like that. We have, contrary to popular belief, we are not a mission full of registered sex offenders, but we do have a small number of sex offenders who are in the Men's Center, and boy, housing for them is really, really difficult. And then we have what's called the Life Change Program, and that is a 12 to 18 month residential addiction relapse prevention program that is very structured and very intensive. And we currently have 26 men in that program. And last Friday, we graduated 9 who have completed 18 months. All of them are fully employed. They've reconnected with their families. One has gotten custody of his infant daughter, and they are living in transitional living apartments on the mission campus, where they live for 6 months in essentially simulated independent living before they actually go into into housing. We've had a couple who've moved into Oxford communities, which are sober communities. And for them, it's super important because they've relapsed multiple times. And for them, they really need to live in a community that supports them in their sobriety.
Does our community need another operation like the Eugene Mission to be able to deal with capacities? It seems like we need about 4 times what we actually have.
Definitely have a shortage of detox beds. I think I was reading that Oregon has one of the highest rates of addiction, but one of the lowest numbers of detox beds available. But you know, when you talk about somebody who's in addiction, I'll give an example of one of our life change. Really need to live in a community that supports them in their sobriety.
Does our community need another operation like the Eugene Mission to be able to deal with capacities? It seems like we need about 4 times what we actually have.
Definitely have a shortage of detox beds. I think I was reading that Oregon has one of the highest rates of addiction, but one of the lowest numbers of detox beds available. But you know, when you talk about somebody who's in addiction, I'll give an example of one of our life change graduates. His name's Jackson, and he would happily share his story. Jackson is a 27-year-old, just hell of a guy. Grew up in Coos Bay, Oregon. Came from a loving family, but Jackson just loves alcohol. He loves it. And so for him, he failed 4 30-day programs and had 2 DUIs and knew that he was facing jail time if he got his 3rd DUI. And so he came to the Life Change program. And for Jackson, he's working at Monaco Tool. He's incredibly happy. But for Jackson, he'll need to keep himself in a sober community with sober friends. He's very, very involved in Celebrate Recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous because for him, his alcoholism isn't really driven by trauma. He just likes to drink. But we have another kid, the one who just got custody of his daughter. His name is Kyle Endicott. And he, when he was 4 years old, his mother, an active meth addict, drove with him uncontained in the car, got into an accident, and Kyle went straight from the emergency room to 12 foster homes before he was adopted at the age of 7. So Kyle probably had some drug exposure in his own prenatal days, had some cognitive issues. He goes into the foster care system and he's placed with a family that was incredibly cultish and thought that they could scare and discipline him out of his behavioral problems, took him off his ADHD medications, and would do things like take him out into the woods at night and, you know, approach him with it, just horrible things. So there's that early trauma, and then Kyle was ultimately adopted into a loving family, went to Kennedy Middle School, went to Churchill, was involved in sports. And when he graduated from high school, started dabbling with, you know, drugs and methamphetamine, and just had this intractable addiction. And he talks about it now that he doesn't have that drive to use anymore. But he spent the 12 months in the Life Change program in some heavy duty cognitive behavioral therapy to address the trauma that he was trying to escape through drug use. And so there is a need for addiction support, but as Kris was saying, if you don't fit into those pegs, you don't qualify for that kind of treatment. And most of them are prescribed like you've got 30 days. And for many people, it takes a lot longer than 30 days. And it takes the realization that relapse is very much a part of the disease, and to, you know, when somebody does relapse, not giving up on them, but knowing, wow, if they were sober for 4 months before they relapsed, they had that 4 months to experience sobriety, and meeting them where they are and bringing them in and giving it another try and really supporting them in that sobriety.
Kris, I'd like to bounce this back to you on the issue of follow-on support. What are the primary taskings for the Lane County Homelessness and Poverty Board, and how do you see mental health care on the spectrum of what needs to be done here?
Yes, sir. Well, if I'm wearing the hat of the Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board, we advise the Lane County Commissioners on what the work, the scope and scale of poverty and homelessness and how it affects each of the community members and jurisdictions. We also help advise the HSD projects, the Human Service Division projects, to account for some of these. One of the subcommittees of the Poverty and Homelessness Board is the Healthcare Committee, and that was recently chaired by Dr. Kincaid of Community Healthcare Centers of Lane County. And one of our ideas through that advisory process was mobile medicine. So having either a timed and planned trip to specified camps, or people who knew they had clients on route, and being able to get them access to their stabilization meds or their de-escalation meds to help them work on that front. There was also looks at how do we bring providers into the camps? How do we bring providers into the community? Waiting list, first come, first serve, standing out in the sun, standing out in crowds, waiting for your medicine or your food. That kind of goes against a lot of what was advised for the COVID prevention. And so then when you send people to areas where you don't have bathrooms and you don't have sanitation stations, you can't have them wash their hands and be clean while also waiting and all this. And so there's a lot of our fixes had been built for housed and built for non-COVID considerations. You'll notice a lot of the solutions that were provided from the state level were for housed people and very little direction for those who were serving the unhoused. There were dollars available to do congregate settings, but not setups for people who are individuals who can't be where a bunch of direct services are. And so with that in mind, we as the Poverty and Homelessness Board spoke about having not only places to be, but also a diversity of menu. We need to have places where one person can be, where they aren't, if they happen to be a 4 a.m. screamer, because that's where their heart and their head is at right now, then they need a place for them to scream and to scream and to scream until they can let it go and be who they feel they need to be at that point. We don't have that option in a bed of a 10-room facility like what I run. We don't have that option in a 60-person camp. We don't have that option in a 200-person building. There are very few options for the actual triaged needs. We need places for people to be, and we need places for people to be seen by medical professionals. The county has heard us a little bit, and they are creating teams to be able to go out. One, I believe, is called the FIT team, forensic investigation triage team, I believe it's called. They are supposed to be prescribers, mental health workers who go out and understand. And so that's supposed to debut next month, I believe. This is the work of the county, but it's been advised by both professionals who are often in these kind of symposiums, as well as those who have been lived experience, peer support specialists, and community members.
Yeah, you use the word triage. I almost work triage into the title because that's what I see is we really need to identify those in the most immediate needs, establish some priorities on how we provide treatment. And frankly, there are just some people out there that are not going to accept help even if offered. So it's a difficult situation. We got a couple of minutes. Any other comments from our speakers? And I'll invite questions if our audience has any at this time through the chat.
Ron, if I may just do a quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
While I was introduced as the chair of Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board, I'm also the co-director of Carry It Forward, which is a nonprofit that does on-the-street triage direct services. And a lot of our work has been trying to fill in the gaps of what isn't offered in the big system. And so like we are providing showers in Springfield. We're providing COVID vaccines in Springfield. Like we work on just triaging people who've fallen out of the other shelter options. And we run our own congregate shelter, and we've also run some camps. So like we see the spectrum. We're not just everybody who's been advising on the PHB stuff, they're not talking heads. They're people who are in the work. They are people who are feeling and seeing and experiencing the trauma every day of our people as either solutions go and come away, or as things are tested and then decided that they're not going to work for a bigger community. And so when we advise, when we serve, when we try and build solutions, as long as we maintain connection, we hear the voice, we look for that lived experience. We built a lived experience committee for the Poverty and Homelessness Board because I was not going to be the one voice for homelessness. And with that in mind, we now have 10 people who have experienced different forms of homelessness who help advise the PHB on what it should be targeting and focusing on. And everybody there has lived experience of being homeless on the streets. So
We'd be in bad shape without non-governmental organizations. It's our private foundations that do a lot of the heavy lifting, and this is not a fair statement.
So yes, and it's also government contracts. A lot of our people could not do the services they're trying to do without having government contracts, which sets its own set of tools and rules and whatnot for compliance. But it also wouldn't be surviving at all for the services that the government says we can't do, but the community says we need to do. That's where the private dollars and where the private volunteering and the community organizing comes into play, in my opinion. I also stand for correction or challenge.
All right, well, thank you. Any other, Beth, anything further?
No, not that I can think of unless anybody has.
Okay, it's been a good discussion. Brittany, any last comment from you?
I just wanted to point out, you talked about mental health facilities. The county is actively working with healthcare providers across the community on a new kind of mental health facility and service. So I think that's something to keep an eye out for. I think that, to Kris's point, the county has sort of taken this this issue seriously, and they've heard from the folks like him and Beth, who are on the ground, saying that, like, this is one of the biggest issues that we're facing, is an actual facility that can serve and support individuals in crisis. So I think there's some active conversations going on about what that might look like in our community. And then I guess I just wanted to say that I have an enormous amount of respect and support for Kris and Beth and Mike and the other folks you're going to see here this morning, because they are actively on the ground supporting and serving these individuals who are in these crises every single day. And it's really easy for my job to be looking at a systematic level and how are we improving the system. The reality is every single person on the street has a unique need and a unique set of things that they themselves need. And so that's why this issue is so complex, is because it's about people, and people are complex. And so we can try as much as we want to solve it up here at the 30,000 foot level, but it's the people on the ground who are actually solving the issues. So I have an enormous amount of respect for those folks.
I've got an indication we have a question from Sandra Bishop. She didn't put that in the chat, but if we can let Sandra in to pose that to Kris.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Kris. It's wonderful to see you. And Brittany, I really appreciate your presentation. It's so important for people to get the facts. I was going to ask you, Kris, where does the funding come from Carry It Forward? And the context that I'm asking that question in is that I have heard that it's almost impossible for small, very effective, very successful groups such as yours to get any money from the county or the government. So it's a problem of how are contracts being put out? How is public money distributed? So are you able to tap into any of the government money?
Yes, ma'am. Just to answer this real quickly, knowing that there's a wide variety of things that could apply for this. A few years ago, when we were simply doing just the triage work, we were predominantly a single donor, small group donor funded, maxing out at like 60,000. When we started to do the work with the camps and the COVID really changed things. And we had to retool entirely as an organization, hire new people, add new things in order to start to receive some of the government contracts and funding and to be able to keep up with compliance. But it's a struggle. It is a little bit of an uphill learning curve. And but the county and the cities has realized this, especially during COVID, especially during the holiday fires, and has started to look at ways that they can refine, streamline, and make it a little bit more accessible. There will always be a learning curve. There will always be a difference between an established nonprofit and a grassroots effort. and there's always things that you can learn from your brothers and sisters in the other communities. St. Vinny's and the Mission and other United Way have all been helpful in both role modeling how to do certain things and also how to start to work with other partners to help cover where we don't have. You can't be everybody's everything, but you can be specialized in what you're good at and what your tool set is. And as long as you keep doing that, then other people will do it. Church Women United, Anne's Heart are also groups that have latched on to what we're doing and have donated as their organizations. And so being clear about where you're at and what you do, people will look into you, and if they approve, they'll send you money.
Kris, thanks a lot. I thank all of our speakers this morning. It's our appointed time to transition to our next panels.